Hi, welcome to my older adult interview. My chosen subject is Diane Hoffman, a 75-year-old, not even close to retiring woman who also happens to be my mother and my hero. We chose to focus on Erikson's middle adulthood because we believed that for her, that was one of the most important and transformational stages of her life. According to Erikson, middle adulthood is the time when you typically focus on what he calls generativity, having kids, raising a family, looking outward into society, thinking about what you want your influence to be. You know, how you want to really leave your mark on the world. And it is perhaps a more ever-present thought at this stage than it is before or even after. I don't think, nor does Diane, that she would be the person she is had it not been for some of the triumphs, challenges, tragedies, and heartbreaks that happened to her between the ages of about 45 and 65. The psychosocial crisis, which I have chosen to focus on, and which we talked extensively about, was a divorce. When Diane was 44, 45, her divorce was finalized. It had been a really tough go of it up to the time that the decree was signed. And that was really nothing compared to what it was going to be like after the decree was signed. Diane found herself alone with the challenge of raising 2 children. She had not worked for approximately 20 years, so she was looking at not only re-entering the workforce, but finding a position that would allow her to support 2 children, to pay the bills, to give them and herself the kind of life that she had always aspired to and had worked for. The divorce itself had been quite acrimonious. So in some respects, when it was finalized, and she could really start to put the pieces back together and decide, where am I going to go, what am I going to do, it was really a relief, but it was also intensely frightening. Because it's not something that she or anybody, I think, really ever anticipates. She was now in a position of having to cope with the stress of raising 2 children alone, to cope with the feelings that attend any sort of divorce or loss, as well as a quickly changing world. And this kind of, I think, was the time, as she said, when she thought things were going to get to be easier, when things were going to stabilize, when really sort of the big issue in life was going to be, how do I raise my kids to be responsible human beings? And instead, she was forced to confront the question, how do I put food on the table? How do I keep a roof over their head? How do I make sure that they're not doing their homework by flashlight because I can't pay the utility bill? After a 20-year hiatus from work, Diane now had to re-enter the workforce. The mid-1980s was very different than the mid-1960s. She had to re-educate herself. She had to retrain herself. had to face all of those challenges, all while balancing the demands of raising a family and of taking into account those non-economic costs of divorce. A lot of people focus on single parenthood, changing houses, but there's a very real cost to the family. And perhaps even more than the earning potential, Diane was concerned with minimizing the impact of shifting roles, changing family dynamics, more demands on her time, on her children, and on the kind of mother and person whom she had decided she always wanted to be. In addition to re-entering the workforce, retraining, re-educating, figuring out where to work, how to balance time, how to still be present in the lives of her children while working enough hours that these children, me for one, could still do what they wanted to do. Soccer's not free. Going to the mall with friends is not free. And she did not want her children to be deprived of any of those opportunities. Not to mention the fact that one of her children, me, was poised on the precipice of adolescence. I was about 13 years old when my parents' divorce was finalized. So she was now staring down the barrel of having one adolescent trying to figure out her own identity, while my mom was trying to figure out, Diane was trying to figure out what her new identity was going to be. Another major hurdle and part of the sort of psychosocial crisis that was happening was Diane's decision to stay in the family home. Instead of moving someplace less expensive, going to an apartment, moving in with a family member, she made the decision to keep as many of the sort of micro, meso, and exosystems, to be a little bit ecological about systems theory, intact. She wanted the same school, the same neighbors, the same friends, the same church, and the same community to minimize the impact of this major life change for herself and for her family. In the 1980s, although the divorce rate was probably about 50%, it wasn't something that was talked about. There was no shame. There was no stigma. But it wasn't really something that you necessarily broadcast. So in addition to all of the very practical demands of being a single parent, of starting a new job, Diane also had to deal with some of her own sort of attendant feelings of an unsuccessful marriage. Also, Diane is Catholic, and there is a tremendous amount of pressure, especially in the 1980s when the church was a little less progressive, put on people to stay in marriages. It very much disrupted her perceived relationship with the church, which admittedly was the least of her concerns, but it's still a concern. In addition to all of these other things, Diane was now facing life as a me instead of a we, as a single woman, as opposed to someone who, like everyone, had assumed that marriage was going to be forever. So she's redefining herself. She's redefining her relationship with the world. She's redefining her relationship with her friends. She's trying to figure out how to raise kids alone, how to be there for them, how to give to them what she wanted to as a mother, what she had gotten from her own mother and father, yet to balance that with the demands of, again, the practical, pragmatic thing of keeping a roof over all of our heads. On top of all of this, her father passed away rather unexpectedly. He hadn't been in the best of health, but no one necessarily expected him to pass. It was a blow to the entire family. And it was a tremendous blow to my mother, well, to Diane, who lost the most important male in her life, her father, who really had stepped in as a father to her children as well, which is why I'm a little misty-eyed now. I apologize for that. So the real question becomes, looking at all the things that were going on, looking at all the issues, looking at all the problems, looking at all the struggles, how did Diane not only survive, but thrive? What is it that makes her such a proud, independent, strong, kind, altruistic woman? Why is it that of all the people I could have interviewed, I picked her? And I think, and she agrees, that much of that is because of the way she managed to resolve what really could have been a sort of crushing crisis in middle adulthood. Something that could have hampered her functioning, something that could have changed her outlook on life, changed her personality. What was it, really, that led to a resolution of this conflict? And it's pretty easy. The motto, you either get bitter or you get better. Diane lives by that motto. And because of that, she was able to move beyond. It was a combination of having an unbelievably strong family support network with her own personal skills to adapt, to cope, to be resilient. And it was also the fluidity of certain systems in her own life to sort of step in, to sort of seep into some of the holes that were created by this crisis. Diane did not deal with any oppression per se. She, like me, is a white woman. We are in the majority. We don't tend to suffer from the same kind of oppression. However, Diane did have one really kind of major strike against her, and that is that she didn't have a college education. Going to school in the 1950s and the 1960s, the path that most women took was, you took business ed courses, or you took teacher preparation courses. Because pretty much the expectation was you were going to get married. Before you got married, maybe you were going to be a secretary, an office support professional, or a teacher. But after that, you probably weren't going to be the primary breadwinner. It's kind of a very leave it to beaver kind of mentality. There's nothing wrong with that. But Diane never went to college. So everything she learned, all of those skills that have allowed her to be the director of human resources for a major corporation, were all self-taught. And were all engendered by her own life skills, her ability to adapt. Systems theory is an interesting way to look at the way Diane managed to navigate the crisis in her life. And we agree, of all the perspectives, and we talked about the different ones, that this was perhaps the most useful because it gave her a chance to discuss and to really reflect upon the positive influence certain systems had on her life. Systems theory basically talks about the interplay between the individual and the different social systems to which they belong. For Diane, one of her primary social systems, the immediate family, was shattered by divorce, was shattered by single parenthood. But it really was the systems theory idea of reciprocity that allowed for the redefinition of roles in the family. System definitions shifted. Roles shifted as input and output changed. Diane became the primary breadwinner, the primary financial support. The older sibling, happens to be me, slid into more of a caregiver role to my younger brother. My younger brother accepted that there were certain things that Diane used to do that I was now going to do. And he also assumed greater responsibility within the family. The extended family also came in, and I think probably was more present in Diane's life than maybe they would have been otherwise, as the family system strove to reach equilibrium, a new equilibrium, an unplanned equilibrium, but that's what systems want. Systems strive for equilibrium. And in looking at systems theory, and the way different systems came together, changed, and shifted, is a really useful way to account for what Diane considers to be her triumph over what could have been a very terrible experience. The one problem with systems theory, though, is that it does not really take into account Diane's own skills of personal resilience. And it's also too focused on problems. It's too focused on the dysfunction, what went wrong, sometimes, than what went right. how the support systems worked, how her own characteristics allowed her to rise above what could have been very crippling. I guess that's pretty much all there is to say about Diane, about how she navigated middle adulthood, about the way she confronted some of the issues which to so many people are so crippling, and triumphed over them, used them as sources of strength as opposed to sources of woe, sources of sorrow. On a personal note, Diane's spirit, Diane's resilience, and Diane's example have not only made me who I am, but have made me want to be, much like Diane was, is, and always will be, a person for others. Without her, and I know I'm probably not supposed to do this in this video, but without her, I would not be making this video, because I would not want to use all I've learned from her to help others. Thank you. Have a great night.